At my own engagement party, my twin sister leaned close to my ear and whispered 4 words I will never forget. He chose me, not you. I looked at Daniel. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor. Every single person in that room was watching, and every single one of them thought I was the one about to fall apart. They were wrong. My name is Vanessa Cole, and I'm 34 years old. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes, I don't post emotional rants online, and I don't waste energy on arguments I haven't already won. I work as a corporate contract manager at a mid-sized tech company, which basically means I spend my days reading documents that nobody else wants to read. Clauses, subclauses, liability terms, exit conditions. While most people skim the fine print, I study it. I circle things. I ask questions. It's not glamorous work, but it has taught me something that no amount of charm or confidence ever could. It taught me that the details people ignore are almost always the details that matter most. Growing up, my twin sister Natalie was the one people noticed first. She had this energy that filled a room the moment she walked in. Louder, bolder, funnier. She had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the world, right up until she needed something from someone else. Our parents adored her. Not in a secret way either. It was open, obvious, comfortable for everyone, except me. Natalie was bold. Natalie was magnetic. I was reliable. I was safe. Those were the exact words my mother used at a family dinner once, like being safe was something to be embarrassed about. I wasn't jealous of Natalie, exactly. Jealousy implies you want what someone else has. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name. It was the slow, grinding exhaustion of always being second in a room where you're supposed to be equal, of watching your own parents reach for your sister first in photographs, of being the twin people had to think twice to remember. So I focused on other things. I built my career carefully. I read obsessively. I learned how systems worked, how agreements held power, how the right words placed in the right document could protect a person in ways that a smile never could. 2 years ago, I met Daniel at a dinner party through mutual friends. He was easy to talk to, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in what I had to say, not just what I looked like or how loud I laughed. For the first time in my adult life, I had something I hadn't built from strategy or discipline. I had something that just felt real. We dated for a year and a half. He proposed on a quiet Tuesday evening. No performance, no audience, just the two of us in his kitchen with pasta burning on the stove. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The engagement party was scheduled 3 weeks later. Close friends, immediate family, a rented restaurant room with warm lighting and a menu we'd chosen together. I remember thinking it felt like a beginning, the kind of beginning you spend years waiting for, without even realizing it. Natalie arrived 40 minutes late. She walked in wearing a deep red dress, already smiling, and the room turned toward her the way rooms always did. She hugged her mother first, then her father, then she crossed the room and hugged Daniel just slightly too long. I noticed. I told myself I was being sensitive. I was not being sensitive. If you've ever spent your whole life being compared to someone, especially a sibling, you already understand what that weight feels like. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits on your chest, steady and quiet every single day. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. Drop a comment below and tell me, were you the quiet one too? And if you believe the quiet ones always surprise everyone in the end, hit like or click hype right now. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything. The first hour of the party felt normal. People were laughing, drinks were being refilled, someone had connected a playlist to the speaker and it was playing softly in the background. I was making rounds, talking to friends, accepting congratulations with the kind of grateful smile you practice without meaning to. But Natalie was always close. Wherever Daniel stood, she found a reason to be nearby. She laughed at everything he said a bit too enthusiastically. She touched his arm when she made a point, just her fingertips, casual, the way you touch someone you're already comfortable with. I watched it from across the room and felt the first real flicker of unease settle somewhere below my ribs. Then came the toast. Our friend James was holding his glass and delivering a sweet, slightly awkward speech about how Daniel had finally met his match. He was barely 3 sentences in when Natalie raised her own glass and cut across him with a wide smile. "Isn't it funny," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "how things work out? Sometimes people end up with a wrong twin." She laughed. A few people laughed with her, uncertain, the way guests laugh at a joke they don't fully understand but don't want to be left out of. James looked confused. Daniel looked at the table. I kept my expression exactly still. 30 minutes later, I stepped into the hallway that connected the private dining room to the coat check. I needed a moment of quiet. What I got instead was something worse. Natalie and Daniel were standing at the far end of the hall, speaking in low, pressed voices. I stopped moving. The smell of someone's abandoned perfume was still hanging in the air from earlier, floral and slightly too sweet, and under it the faint smell of the restaurant kitchen, garlic and warm bread. I focused on both smells just to keep myself steady while I processed what I was hearing. Natalie said tightly, "You promised this would be over by now." Daniel replied, his voice careful and quiet, "Just give it time." I stood completely still. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loudly. I just listened until they stepped apart, and I slipped back into the main room before either of them turned around. 20 minutes after that, Natalie found me near the dessert table. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper, the smile on her face perfectly constructed. "He chose me," she said. "He just doesn't know how to tell you yet." I looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then I excused myself. I found Daniel in a corner near the bar and asked him quietly if there was something he needed to say to me. He looked at his drink. He He opened his mouth twice without speaking. Then he said, "Everything is complicated right now." That hesitation told me more than any confession could. When I walked back into the main room, I could feel the shift. Guests were speaking in lower voices. A few people glanced at me with that specific kind of pity that people try to disguise as concern. Natalie was standing beside Daniel again, her posture easy, her expression relaxed, like someone who had already decided how the evening would end. She thought she had won. I went home that night, changed my clothes, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. The following days were a specific kind of painful that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't rage exactly. It was more like watching a building you'd spent years constructing start to lean, slowly in the wrong direction, while everyone around you insisted the angle looked normal to them. The morning after the party, Natalie posted photos on her social media, her and Daniel laughing, her head tilted toward his. The caption read, "Some things are just written differently than planned." That was all. No explanation, no names, just enough ambiguity to be cruel, and just enough deniability to pretend it was innocent. My phone started buzzing before 8 in the morning. 3 different friends sent me screenshots with the same message in slightly different words. What is going on? I didn't answer any of them yet. I made more tea instead. At a family lunch 2 days later, my parents pulled me aside into the kitchen, while Natalie sat in the living room talking loudly and confidently about nothing in particular. My mother placed her hand on my arm and said in the gentlest voice she could manage, "Natalie didn't mean anything by it. You know how she gets." My father nodded behind her like that settled it. I looked at my mother and said, "Okay, just that." "Okay." She looked slightly relieved, which told me she had expected an argument. The fact that I didn't give her one made her think she had resolved something she hadn't. She had simply confirmed what I already suspected, that in this family, in this specific pattern we had all been living inside for 34 years, Natalie's behavior would always be explained away before it was ever examined honestly. I wasn't angry at my parents. I was finished being surprised by them, which is its own kind of grief. Daniel continued avoiding direct conversation. When I called, he answered but offered nothing. When I asked flat questions, he gave careful non-answers. I need some time to think. Things got out of hand. I never meant for this to happen. Every sentence was designed to sound like accountability, without actually being accountable for anything specific. I recognized the structure. I read contracts. I knew what vague language was for. Meanwhile, Natalie grew bolder. She started texting Daniel in plain sight when we were all in the same room, the screen slightly angled away in the practiced way of someone who has already decided they don't need to hide anymore. She joked at a cousin's coffee visit about how weddings are complicated when twins are involved. Everyone laughed. I smiled politely and said nothing. Inside, I was not panicking. I was remembering. About 8 months before the engagement party, Daniel and I had a long conversation about finances. We were beginning to plan seriously. Shared accounts, a potential down payment on an apartment, preliminary deposits on a venue. I told him I wanted a relationship agreement drafted before we mixed any finances or made any binding commitments. He laughed at first. He said, "You're really bringing a contract into this?" I told him I brought a contract into everything. He signed it on a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table, still laughing a little, shaking his head like I was endearingly strange. The contract outlined several things: division of shared expenses in the event of a separation, a loyalty clause, which stipulated that if either party was found to have engaged in a romantic or intentional personal relationship with a third party while this agreement was active, the offending party would be responsible for repaying all shared deposits, engagement-related costs, and a penalty amount equal to 15% of total joint financial activity during the agreement period. Daniel had skimmed it. I had written every word. Here is something I've learned from a decade of contract work. People sign documents most carefully when they believe the document matters, and they sign documents most carelessly when they assume nothing will ever go wrong. Daniel signed carelessly. He assumed nothing would ever go wrong. 4 weeks before the engagement party, I noticed a shift in his behavior. Shorter replies, a canceled dinner I didn't push back on, a weekend trip that materialized quickly with an explanation that felt slightly rehearsed. I didn't react. I started documenting. I saved messages, I noted dates and times, I described specific incidents in a private notes file on my phone with timestamps, and I called my friend Renata, a senior corporate attorney I had worked with early in my career, the woman who first taught me that the most important line in any agreement is the one that defines what happens when everything else fails. Renata reviewed the contract. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Vanessa, this is enforceable. You structured this well." She asked me if I had documentation to support a loyalty clause violation. I told her I was still gathering it. She said, "Then keep gathering. Don't react yet. Let them keep moving." I kept my phone screen down at all social events. I kept my voice level. I kept smiling at the right moments and keeping my thoughts entirely to myself. Natalie thought she was stealing my fiancé. She had no idea she was walking herself directly into a legal consequence she hadn't read because she had never thought to look for it. The following week, Renata and I met twice. She reviewed everything I had compiled: the screenshots, the social media post, the time-stamped notes, the voice messages Daniel had left, where his own language confirmed the timeline. She confirmed the documentation, combined with the signed agreement, created a clear and actionable case. She said, "You could take this to mediation, or you could present it publicly and let the social pressure do the work first. Either way, you're in a strong position." I told her I wanted witnesses. I didn't want a private resolution that Natalie and my family could later reframe as a misunderstanding or a dramatic overreaction from the quiet twin who finally cracked under pressure. There was a family engagement celebration already scheduled, a larger gathering at my aunt's house, about 30 people, the kind of event that had been planned weeks in advance and that canceling would itself cause a scene. I confirmed my attendance. I told no one what I was planning. Natalie arrived at my aunt's house that evening in another bold dress, moving through rooms with the specific confidence of someone who believes the outcome is already decided. She had been telling people, I later learned, the engagement was essentially over and that she and Daniel had been honest with each other about their feelings. She framed it as something brave. She framed herself as someone who had simply been truthful in a complicated situation. I arrived slightly after her, wearing something simple and dark. I carried a folder. Nobody noticed it. Renata came with me. She sat near the back of the main room, her expression neutral, her jacket crisp, looking precisely like what she was, someone who had spent 20 years knowing exactly what a room would look like before the moment it changed. Natalie waited until enough people were gathered in the main room. Then she picked up her glass, cleared her throat lightly, and said in a warm and carrying voice, I think most of us already know the truth, and I think it's time to stop pretending otherwise. Sometimes love chooses the other twin. She placed her hand on Daniel's arm. He let her. The room went completely silent. 30 people staring at me. I could hear someone's ice settle in their glass. I could hear my aunt's kitchen clock ticking from the next room. I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Natalie. I looked directly at the center of the room, at no one in particular, and I said, you're right about one thing. Truth matters. I placed the folder on the coffee table in front of me and opened it. I explained calmly that 8 months ago, Daniel and I signed a relationship agreement before combining any finances for our engagement. I explained the structure of the agreement in clear, simple terms. I explained the loyalty clause and its specific conditions. I explained what those conditions triggered and what the financial obligations were based on the documentation I had compiled over the previous 4 weeks. Then I stepped back. Renata stood and introduced herself by name and professional title. She confirmed the contract was valid and that she had reviewed all supporting documentation. She outlined the specific financial obligations the agreement activated: full repayment of all shared engagement deposits, shared housing application fees, and the 15% penalty on joint financial activity during the agreement period. She named the total figure clearly and without hesitation. The room was absolutely still. Natalie had stopped smiling. Her hand was no longer on Daniel's arm. She was looking at the folder on the table the way you look at something you don't quite recognize but feel certain is dangerous. Daniel said, you can't be serious. I looked at him directly. I always read the fine print. His face did something complicated, somewhere between disbelief and the slow, arriving understanding that he had signed something he hadn't fully read at a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, laughing. Natalie turned to him as if she was waiting for him to do something that would fix it. He didn't. He stared at the table. He had no contract. He had no documentation. He had nothing prepared because neither of them had ever imagined preparation was something I was capable of. My aunt was the first person to speak. She said quietly, Vanessa, not as a question, just my name said the way people say a name when they are recalibrating something they thought they understood. The guests who had once whispered about me at the engagement party, who had watched Natalie make her toast and assumed I was the one with nothing left, were now watching Natalie stand with nothing. The embarrassment in the room was real and visible, and it was not pointed at me. I picked up my engagement ring from where I'd placed it on the table beside the folder. I held it for a moment. Then I set it back down, gently, with the kind of finality that doesn't require any additional words. I said clearly that the relationship was over, and that the terms of the agreement would proceed through Renata's office as outlined. I thanked everyone for coming. Then I picked up my bag, and Renata and I walked out together. The air outside was cool, the kind of cool that feels deliberate after a warm and crowded room. I stood on the pavement for a moment and just breathed. I didn't feel victorious. That wasn't the right word for it. What I felt was something cleaner and much harder to describe. Relief. The specific relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to put it down. Daniel called twice before we reached the car. I didn't answer. Natalie didn't call at all. My mother texted 3 words. We need to talk. I read it and put my phone back in my bag. Renata and I drove to a late-night diner and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a booth with the comfortable silence of 2 people who have just done exactly what they planned to do. She told me I'd handled it well. I told her I'd handled it the only way I knew how. In the days that followed, the people who had laughed at Natalie's jokes became quietly unavailable. The cousin who found the wrong twin comment funny stopped returning her calls. My parents said less and less, which was its own kind of answer. The social media post disappeared. I noticed but didn't comment. Natalie had believed that confidence was the same thing as power. She had spent so many years winning by being louder and more bold and more immediately captivating that she had never once considered what it would mean to go up against someone who had been quietly building a framework around her for months without her knowing it. I had been the quiet twin my entire life, safe, reliable, easy to overlook, and I had used every... Natalie never bothered that preparation is not the opposite of strength. It is the most reliable form of it. The engagement was over. The contract was proceeding. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. I was just standing. That was enough. They thought the quiet one would lose, but quiet people notice everything. everything. And sometimes what they notice is exactly the thing that changes everything. If someone has ever tried to humiliate you in public or take something from you that was truly yours, you already know how that moment lives in your body long after it's over. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? Leave your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you believe quiet strength is still strength, and click hype to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. Your story has power. If something in mine felt familiar, share it, comment on it, and let someone else know they're not alone. Every hype you give this video helps it reach someone who might be going through the exact same thing right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.